Welcome everyone. I'm so happy to be here from NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. And can you hear me? Louder? Okay. Okay. So I'll try to project. I took some theater classes when I was about 6 years old, but it's been a long time, so I don't know if I still have it. Okay. So thank you for coming. Thank you to Professor Allison and Joanna and Randall for helping put this thing together. It's very exciting to be here to represent NASA and be part of this special event today, which actually aims to engage the community in solving the climate crisis. And I think that's where it really has to happen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I am a scientist at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. Many people forget that there is a NASA facility located right in Los Angeles County, in Pasadena, which is only about an hour from here, or about 15 hours with traffic, and right next door. And I'm a scientist, which means everything that I do with PowerPoint slides. So my daughter is 6, and when I get angry at her, I put together a quick little presentation, and I make her sit down and show it to her, and hopefully she probably doesn't learn anything, but she gets some training in that sense in how to, present things. So let's get started. So when people think of NASA, usually they think of astronauts. And can I ask a show of hands, who has seen this movie or is familiar with this picture, right? So this was a great movie. It's called The Martian. And it is the 2016 Golden Globe winner for the best film. And it's a story of an astronaut who gets essentially sent to Mars, gets stuck on Mars, and then they have to rescue him. And a lot of the NASA activity around this rescue takes place at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, right? Which is featured in the movie. Of course, the JPL in the movie, kind of looks like this. And we have these beautiful offices there with windows. And of course, everyone that works there is incredibly attractive and sexy, right? And in real life, it's exactly like that. No, I'm just kidding. So in real life, we have these old offices, and we have ceiling tiles with like asbestos coming out and regular checkups. And yeah, we're attractive in our own way. We're nerds. We're nerds and we love what we do. And this is a picture of us here celebrating the Mars rover landing on planet Mars and getting emotional there. We love our work, and we're the best in the world at what we do, which is that type of engineering, putting things up in space. And many of those things we put up in space look back down at the planet so we can understand what's happening here on the planet. So this is the actual facility, if anyone's ever been. Anyone ever been there? Or been to JPL? Yeah, cool, all right. And you can come and take tours. We have an open house every June, I think it is. This is what the campus looks like. That's the actual spaceflight operations facility, mission control. And then this is a picture of the actual Mars rover. We built this thing. It's a robot. We put it on a rocket. We launched it. It landed on Mars, and we drive it around on Mars. What many people consider to be the single greatest engineering achievement in the history of mankind. What can we say? We're a little cocky about what we do, but we're good. So you can trust us, right? That's what we do. So we do have celebrities there all the time. This is Matt Damon on Lab right after you shot that movie. And this is me with an actor named Don Cheadle, if you know his face on the bottom right. That's me when I'm a bit younger, but okay. Okay, so I am a scientist. What does that mean other than I make PowerPoint slides? So science works like this. There's some natural phenomenon. Scientists observe that phenomenon. And then we try to describe that phenomenon for other people to understand, right? That's how science works. That's what we do. What we do at NASA is essentially the same thing. We have the natural phenomenon, which is the Earth. Our microscopes are satellites. We look to those satellites to understand what's happening. And then we describe phenomenon for people to understand. We try to explain how things work. Sometimes we find things that interest us. Yeah? Sometimes we find things that are amazing. Sometimes we see things that scare us. And sometimes we're just completely blown away. But no matter what, we love our work. It makes us happy, and we just walk around like this all day smiling and laughing. This was one of my favorite movies as a kid, so I just had to include it. I had to include it in the talk. And then what we do is we take what we find and we publish it in these very prestigious academic journals, like Science and Nature, which no one reads. And so we're aware of that. And so what we have to do as scientists is make the effort to go out and speak to people like you, like I am doing today, to get the message out there about what we're finding. A major recent discovery, we have finally found the square root. So there you go. NASA at its best. Okay. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we know about climate change, right? That's what we're here to talk about today, to try to understand climate change. You probably all already know something about climate change. I'm just going to cover the basics, and then we'll talk a little bit about the issues surrounding it. Okay, so what causes global warming? All right, so I think we have a pretty good idea at this point, right? I'm sorry, I didn't plan to make this so funny, but I think it's turning out to be a little bit too funny, and I think we should get serious for a minute. Okay, but this is obviously what causes global warming. If you know who this guy is, right, that means you've been around this topic for a while, right, because he's now much older, right? And so this is, this movie with Al Gore in it, An Inconvenient Truth, is one of those early things that actually got me thinking about, what am I going to do with my life? Maybe I can do something to contribute to this issue of climate change. And truly inspiring. Of course, this is not real. This is a drawing. Okay. So the Earth's greenhouse effect, how does it actually work? So, let's simplify it. We have something called shortwave radiation that comes in from the sun. Shortwave radiation we can think of as light. Light is coming in, and then that warms up the land surface, and then the land emits something called long-wave radiation, which we can think of as heat. So light comes in, heat radiates off the surface, and that heat then bounces off of molecules that are in the atmosphere that happen to be the right size to vibrate with those wavelengths of heat. Those are called greenhouse gases. So any molecule that's in the air that's vibrating with that wavelength of heat is a greenhouse gas. The most prevalent greenhouse gas is, anyone? Water. Water is the most prevalent greenhouse gas. There's enough water in the atmosphere, and water is very important. It keeps our humidity, it maintains ecosystems, it maintains life, and it is a greenhouse gas. The most prevalent and important greenhouse gas. Then we have additional greenhouse gases, such as man-made greenhouse gases and natural greenhouse gases, things like CO2 and methane. And those are also changing the greenhouse capacity of the atmosphere. These are actual pictures of our planet. This is from a mission called Suomi NPP, and these were taken in a single day in January of 2015, these images, and then composited onto a sphere like this so we can see the planet from space. And this is kind of what our Earth looks like at any given time. When you step back and look at it like this, at least for me, this is an amazing image. We get a sense of this unified globe, right? That we are all here, we all live here. The only known planet in the entire universe that contains life so far, and it's a pretty impressive place to be, pretty exciting. If I was to ask you guys to point to the humans in this picture, can you see humans from space? Do you see humans? Can you see human beings in this globe? You say maybe Great Wall of China or something like that, but you can't really see human beings, right? Of course you can see human beings from space. The only thing you have to do is to turn out the lights. So these are pictures from the exact same mission of the dark side of the planet, the dark side of the Earth, the side that the sun is not hitting, right? And so these are composited in the same way. And when we look at this image, we can imagine that if there were alien species out there somewhere looking at the Earth from a distance through a telescope, they would see these nighttime lights. They would see evidence of human activity, of civilization on this planet from far, far away. And that's pretty incredible because it means even from space, we're able to see the impact that humans have on our planet. And humans have impacted our planet in many ways. This is just one of them. But very exciting to know that we can see that from space. We are visible if people are looking. Or people, maybe not people. Maybe, all right, anyway, I'm getting off topic. So this is kind of a human timeline, a human historical timeline. The first roughly human apparent species was about 2.5 million years ago, 2.5 million BC. Only about 200,000 years ago did we have the first Homo sapiens, the first, what we are today, our intelligence, our body structure, our brains, our skulls, about 200,000 years ago. Do I have a pointer on here? These. There we go. Only about 10,000 years ago did we have the first beginnings of agriculture. Right? So that's 5% of our existence. 10,000 years ago, of 200,000 years, we had our first agriculture, first farming, first lead into what we now call civilization. And so that's pretty recent. Then we evolved, we had the Roman Empire, a lot of exciting things happening in here. Catholic Church, Reformation, Byzantine, World War I, World War II, fall of Berlin Wall. If you've been alive for a while, it's been very exciting. But only about the past 150 years have we actually had this industrial capacity to start producing greenhouse gases on a major scale, a scale big enough that it actually starts to influence our climate on this planet. Right? So very recent in our history. And this is what that looks like. This is 400,000 years of history of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is taken from ice cores. So we know what the composition of the atmosphere was because little pieces of the atmosphere, little bubbles of air get trapped in ice that's very old. And then we can see what was happening in the atmosphere at those times in history. When we look across those 400,000 years, we do see these natural oscillations in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. You know, somewhere between 200 and 300 parts per million. That's a very small ratio of CO2 in the atmosphere. But then up through the 1910s, we started departing from what's been typical for the past 400,000 years. We're in a new regime, right? And that's as a result of industrial emissions, CO2 that we've produced that gets injected into the atmosphere. And up to the present, through 2015, we finally crossed 400 parts per million in the atmosphere, which is essentially off the charts in regard to history. So we're producing more CO2 now than has ever been on the planet in the past 400,000 years. We're setting a new record. And that's what's causing the issues of climate change. So this is kind of what it looks like from space on any given day. This is a composite of 5 days of data from NASA satellites, where you see biomass burning as orange here, CO2 sources. You're seeing a lot of burning around the Sahel region that almost has a rhythm to it, a daily rhythm to it, kind of that pulsing of the day. And then we're also seeing CO2 being emitted from major cities. So that's industry, that's cars, that's the things we typically think of as emitting CO2. You know, you have China here, you have, you know, Los Angeles over here, you know, Mexico City, New York, all these major cities also emitting CO2. Both colors are the same thing. They're both CO2. It's just showing you that there's these different sources of CO2. Humans are burning forest. A lot of times that burning is done to make space for agriculture, to make space for cattle grazing, as well as we're emitting from cities. These two sources are the two primary sources of generation of CO2 into the atmosphere. It's kind of just to get a sense of what it looks like. When we look over the past 50 years, this is actually the past 70 years, this is since 1950, we're seeing the cumulative effect of a bunch of human activities on warming. So what we do is we take each of those human activities and we try to estimate how much warming that contributes to the atmosphere. So we have things like aerosols, which actually cool the atmosphere a bit because they provide additional cloud cover, and that blocks radiation coming in. So aerosols a little bit cooling. Land use change. When you think about the net effects of land use change, the land emits some, it also takes up some. Albedo changes, which changes kind of the color of the land in many places. A net negative effect. Ozone, which you've heard about, you know, has been around since the ozone hole in the 80s, a net warming effect. But then the greenhouse gases that we emit definitely have a net warming effect. When we average all these human factors together, we find a line that matches almost exactly with the actual warming that we observe. So this is a way to understand that what we expect to happen from human behavior is actually what we're seeing happening on the ground. So that makes us believe that pretty much all the warming we're seeing is due to human behavior, right? So we're closing that budget, and that's how it works. When we map out what are the major sources of those emissions, it's pretty easy to identify them. So this was a pretty landmark scientific study that came out in the journal PNAS, and this is a graphic from this study, where they've mapped out that 63% of industrial carbon dioxide and methane released in the atmosphere from 1850s through the present can be traced to fossil fuel and cement production by just 90 entities. 90 entities, right? So when we look at these entities, these are corporate entities right here that we all know and love and recognize. And many of these are American, British, or European companies. And that's how we work in America, the UK, and England, is with corporations. In other countries, like the former Soviet Union and China, there really are no corporations. Everything is owned by the government, right? That's how they work in those countries. So when we think about this, you've got kind of, these are the major emitters. The United States, Europe, Saudis, Iran, the Soviet Union, China, and then 70 other major carbon producers, right? But the top 20 entities shown here produce 50% of all the industrial carbon pollution. So the reason this paper was written, is complicated, and some people want to try to litigate these companies and make a legal thing out of it. But that being said, it's important to understand that we're all contributing here, right? That we are contributing equally, the developing countries are contributing, and it is our lifestyles that cause these contributions, right? Okay, just fun to map it out sometimes. Okay, so climate change impacts, that's how climate change works. Now let's talk about some of the actual impacts. Probably some of them you've heard about already. Sea level is rising. This is a tide gauge taken from this is a reconstruction at a location where there is a tide gauge in North Carolina, but they've taken this reconstruction back 2,000 years to see historical sea level based on sediments that are there near the tide gauges, right? So we have sea level, sea level, sea level, sea level, some slow variations, and then all of a sudden, in the last 100 years or so, we kind of get this rate of rise, 2.1 millimeters per year, which is pretty big. It's off the charts with respect to the last 2,000 years. And those impacts are starting to happen now around the United States and around the world in something called nuisance flooding, right? Maybe you've heard of nuisance flooding. It's more than a nuisance, in fact. It's called high tide flooding, and it's whenever they have a series of high tides, a little bit of wind event, water gets rushed into streets, into low-lying cities. If you've ever been to like Annapolis, Maryland, they're having major issues right now. Beautiful, beautiful city. Major issues with high tide flooding. And they're trying to think, what do we do? Do we build a seawall? Do we try to raise the level of the city? How do we deal with this? Because it's just overwhelming and the costs are going to be so huge. That's only in the US. There's many other places around the world where this is even a worse issue. But let's stick to the US for a second. This is a map from NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, of the number of billion-dollar and up weather and climate events in just 1 year, 2019. 14 events in 2019 that exceeded $1 billion in cost. Yeah? And so when we look at historically what's been happening, NOAA keeps a great record of this. This should cycle through, I think, here in a second. Yeah, okay. From 1980 through 2017, we're just seeing a steady increase in the number of billion-dollar events. With 2017 hitting $306 billion in costs in the US alone. This is not considering internationally, globally, what are those impacts of climate change. And when we do look globally, we've got several major issues to consider here. Extreme weather, sea level rise, agricultural productivity loss, and then when we add all these together, we kind of see this overall vulnerability where physical impacts, when we adjust for coping ability, the ability of the infrastructure and the society to be resilient in the face of these changes, these are where the impacts are going to strike hardest. This is where the rubber is going to meet the road first of all. And that has impacts on human rights, right? On social rights and on economics. Everyone has the right to food, the right to water, the right to health, the right to housing. We've already had the first cases of climate refugees in the world, right? Where people can no longer live in the place they are. They need to migrate. They need to move on a massive scale to get away from climate change. And so that is something that's happening. It's something real that we need to think about. Okay. So now I just have a couple more quick slides. Climate change, is there a consensus? This is something people ask all the time. Is there a consensus? Does everyone agree with climate change? Okay, let's talk about it for a minute. We got to get into it. We got to cover it before I'm done, so let's talk about it. Scientific consensus. All right, trust scientists. We don't gain from making this stuff up. That's what people say. So apparently, 97% of all scientists that work at all in the field of climate change agree that climate change is real, that it's happening, and that it's caused by humans. Only 3%, 3 out of 100, would say that it's not happening, right? So that's pretty much everyone. That's a scientist agrees it's happening. However, we poll the American public. Climate scientists say yes, 97%, no, 3%. The American voting public says no or they don't know, 56%, and yes, 44%. So there's a major breakdown here in the communication of what's really happening. And a lot of this is supported by the media, right? So if you go on even on CNN, right? You're watching something, they'll have a climate expert, and then they'll have someone to present the opposing position. So you have two people talking, two talking heads, It's never 97 people talking against 3 people. It's always one person talking against one person, and it gives the American public this sense that, oh, this is an equal debate, that people don't know what's happening. Okay, so let's say you don't trust scientists. Who can you trust on this topic? How about this guy? You can trust a celebrity, a famous movie star. You say, no, I can't trust a celebrity. These people have their own agenda. They don't know what's going on. A child. You can trust a child on climate change. Yeah, Greta. Yeah. So I'll just say something. When I started working on climate change topics, 10, 15 years ago, I didn't have any hope. I was like, listen, the only way we're going to solve this thing is to get some policymakers to make changes immediately. There's no way we'll sway the public fast enough to actually make a change here. But when I see 10-year-olds, right, that are like crazy about this topic, it's so inspiring because, that means like 10 or 20 years from now, these are going to be the people that are making decisions. These are going to be the workforce, and they're going to be crazy about climate change. Yeah. But you can't trust a kid. She's just a kid. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She hasn't even gone to college yet. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Who can we trust on this issue? There's nobody out there. How about this guy? It's the Pope. The Pope has said, all right, climate change is something we need a strong stand on for urgent global action. You can't trust this guy. Maybe he's even got his own agenda. Who knows? 2,000 years of Catholicism. Maybe he's up to something, and we don't know what he's up to. All right, if you can't trust any of these people, you got to trust this guy. Okay, this is Larry Fink. This is the most powerful money manager in the world. This is a CEO of BlackRock Investment. Have you heard of this group? BlackRock controls $7 trillion in assets. $7 trillion in assets. And he's come out just in January and said that he will now make investment decisions based on the inevitability of changing climate. He will no longer invest his company's money in non-sustainable investments because there's no money there. There's no money there anymore. It's going to be gone. And so this is a big breakthrough, I think. This guy is a diehard Republican, right? He's not swayed on any other political issues, but climate change is where the smart money is going. So if you can't believe anyone else, believe this guy. Okay, so what are we actually going to do? That's what today is about. Very inspiring. What are we actually here to talk about? We're here today to talk about solutions, right? So let's talk a little bit about solutions. We're going to hear some wonderful talks on solutions. And I'm just going to give you a little taste of where it's going. So these are kind of the historical missions and where we're at. There's many paths to the future, okay? There's a path to the future that actually, cools the planet. We're reducing emissions. We need to reduce emissions just to hit some of these 2 degree and 1.5 degree warming pathways that we're already on. It's already locked in. If we don't do anything, we're going to be up here in this range of warming. And there's a series of tipping points with the ice sheets melting, the Amazon forest collapsing, the ocean circulation shutting down, that are going to have drastic consequences for the entire planet. We're trying to mitigate those tipping points, right? But essentially, to avoid a permanently warmer planet, by 2030, we've got to reduce global emissions by about 50%. And by 2050, we need to be essentially fossil fuel free. Otherwise, we will lock in global warming and its consequences. So what do we do? All right, so we need to first start with the right perspective. Abraham Maslow created this pyramid, if you recognize it. It's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yeah? And this is something he published, a seminal paper, 1943, American psychologist. And he said that, look, if you're down here on this level of basic needs, you're thinking first about yourself and what you need to survive, and you're in that fight or flight mode for survival, right? And you evolve up this pyramid, you start to think about your friendship, your family, the good life, you're building, you start to think about a wider circle, your community maybe. You got to be up here before you even think about the world as an issue. How am I going to change the world? How am I going to contribute to something that might not benefit me directly, but might benefit my grandchildren or might benefit my kids? And we as a society collectively fall somewhere on this pyramid. We each fall individually, but there's also an average kind of psyche of society and where we fall. And if we don't fall beyond a certain level, there's a level at which the Earth will be healthy and will survive, and there's a level at which the Earth will not be healthy. And so we've got to think about that. Of course, one of the most basic needs, I think, right, is we can't really get anything done unless there's a good Wi-Fi signal. Okay. All right. But really, what do? There's a list of actions, but let's be creative. Let's actually solve everything and achieve all of our magnificent dreams at once. We should consider that we maximize impact with our actions. We want to make the biggest difference, and we minimize costs. Cost being effort, energy, money. We don't want to do too much. We just want to do a little bit, and then maybe it works out in the long run. That's fair. And we want to feel good. We want our actions to have intrinsic benefits to the economy and to the community. Are there even any actions that could fulfill all three of these criteria? It's pretty stringent, yeah? Of course there are. So this is a great website. It's called Project Drawdown, and they've actually used analysis from many scientific publications to find the climate solutions that actually enhance communities and economies. These are net win climate solutions. Everybody wins from these things. And so there's a list on this website. You can check it out. Things like refrigerant management, the single greatest thing we can do for climate change. And so there's something that happened in October 2016. Officials from more than 170 countries met in Kigali, Rwanda, to set up something called the Kigali Accord. Will reduce global warming by nearly 1 degree Fahrenheit by dealing with refrigerants that have been mass-produced and are now in the system. So this is something that's already happening. We can feel good about this. So there's things out there that are already happening. People are on it. There's things in here that you need to do as personal consumers. Reducing food waste is one of those things, right? Roughly 8% of global emissions come from post-consumer food waste. That's you and me. We need to do something about it. A plant-rich diet. There's a study that says business as usual emissions could be reduced by as much as 70% if everyone in the world developed a vegan diet, and 63% if everyone in the world was just vegetarian. We don't need to get there, but even 10%. Eat less meat, the planet wins. Okay. There's things in here that you're going to want to vote for. Onshore wind turbines, solar farms. And there's things here that are happening on a global scale that is just important to be educated about and talk to your friends about. Things like the maintenance of tropical forests, the Amazon, a critical ecosystem for all of us, for the entire planet. So let's be aware of that. Okay, so putting these things together, we can finally stop chasing our tails, start chasing our dreams, and start to do something that's going to make a difference. So I hope you guys have a great day today. Enjoy all these talks and all the activities that are going to be happening. These are my take-home messages. I want to be always open to learning. I'm always happy, for the most part. And I want to be responsible for the lifestyle that I'm going to live. And that's simple. I think to help, it helps to join a group. It helps to have support. It helps to get involved in policy development, register voters, protest, and there's going to be opportunities that discuss those options here today. So something to think about. And then, most importantly, just talk about it. Just talk to your friends about it, talk to your family about it, talk to your kids about it, talk to your parents about it, talk to that uncle at Thanksgiving who argues with everyone. Convince that guy. All right, I'm done. Thank you guys very much.